The dealership buzzed with activity the next morning as Henry arrived. Despite the tension Nate had been stirring, Henry greeted every employee with a smile, a word of encouragement or a joke. His calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside him. He knew the time for patience was running out, but he believed in giving people the opportunity to change. Even someone like Nate. Laura met Henry in the showroom, her clipboard in hand, and concern etched across her face. "Morning, Mr. Whitman," she said. "We've had a few strange incidents this week. Incorrect inventory reports, misfiled orders, and yesterday, one of Nate's customers called to say the car they bought was missing key features he promised." Henry frowned. "That's not like you to miss something like that." "I didn't," Laura said. "It wasn't my sale, it was Nate's." Henry had hoped Nate would rise to the occasion after their last conversation, but it was clear the man had no intention of playing by the rules. Henry resolved to deal with him directly after the day's business, but first he had to ensure the dealership ran smoothly. As Henry reviewed inventory in his office, the phone on his desk rang. "Mr. Whitman," came the voice of Kelly, the receptionist. "There's a man on line 2 asking for you. Says it's about one of our cars." Henry picked up the call. Henry immediately called a meeting with Laura and Richard, the previous owner who had stayed on as a consultant. "We can't let this continue," Henry said, his tone firm. "One more slip-up like this and our reputation will be in shambles." "Agreed," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "But firing Nate outright could backfire. He's been here a long time and he knows a lot of our high-end clients." Laura crossed her arms. "Maybe it's time we focused on bringing in new talent instead of clinging to someone who's sabotaging us from the inside." Henry nodded. "You're right. It's time to start looking for replacements." That afternoon, Henry made the announcement at the staff meeting. "We'll be conducting interviews for new sales associates over the next 2 weeks," he said. "This is an opportunity to bring in fresh perspectives and strengthen our team." Nate's face darkened. His jaw tightened. He knew exactly what Henry was doing. The sabotage escalated over the next several days. Henry found damaged inventory records, mysterious discrepancies in sales reports, and even a customer complaint claiming an employee had been rude, an accusation Nate had orchestrated against Laura. The final straw came during a high-profile test drive. A journalist from a major automotive magazine visited Summit Motors to review their top model, the Summit Viper. Nate volunteered to oversee the test drive. "Let me handle this one," he told Henry with a smug grin. "I know how to impress the press." Henry hesitated but agreed, wanting to give Nate one last chance to prove himself. The journalist arrived and was greeted with enthusiasm by Nate, who wasted no time showing off the features of the Summit Viper. Henry observed from a distance, hopeful that things would go smoothly. But halfway through the test drive, disaster struck. Nate, eager to show off the car's speed, ignored the journalist's request to slow down. He lost control on a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a collision with another vehicle. When they returned to the dealership, the journalist stormed inside, visibly shaken. "This was supposed to be a professional review, not a stunt show," he snapped. "If this is how you treat your vehicles, I can't recommend this dealership to anyone." Henry apologized profusely, but the damage was done. That evening, Henry called Nate into his office. "Nate," he began, "you've been with this dealership for a long time. I gave you every opportunity to show me you could adapt to our new direction, but you've made it clear that you're unwilling to change." Nate leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. "So this is it, huh? You're firing me?" "Yes," Henry said firmly. "Effective immediately." Nate stood, his smirk fading. "You'll regret this, old man." Henry didn't flinch. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." The next day, Henry felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he watched Laura and the rest of the team work seamlessly together. Customers left the showroom smiling, and the atmosphere was lighter without Nate's toxic presence. But as the sun set, Henry received an anonymous email that sent chills down his spine. "You think you've won? The game isn't over yet." Henry stared at the anonymous email, its cryptic message lingering in his mind. Nate's warning echoed in his ears. "You'll regret this, old man." But Henry wasn't one to be easily shaken. He forwarded the email to the dealership's IT specialist for tracing, then set it aside. There was too much at stake to let fear distract him. The next morning, Henry arrived at Summit Motors to find an unusual commotion in the parking lot. A sleek black SUV had been parked directly in front of the dealership entrance, blocking the main door. On its windshield was a piece of cardboard with large red letters scrawled across it. "Fraud alert. This dealership cheats its customers." Laura and several other employees stood nearby, whispering. "Who would do something like this?" she asked, looking worried. Henry's expression hardened. "We've got a good idea who." He called the police to have the vehicle towed and went inside to address the staff. "This is a calculated attempt to damage our reputation," Henry said, his voice steady. "But we're not going to let it rattle us. We've worked too hard to build something we can be proud of." The employees nodded, their trust in Henry evident. Despite the morning's disruption, the day progressed smoothly. Sales were steady, and several customers complimented the friendly service they received, a testament to the culture Henry had worked tirelessly to instill. But just as things began to settle, Henry received another blow. A scathing review appeared on a popular local website, accusing Summit Motors of dishonest practices and claiming the cars were defective. The review was signed, "A former employee who knows the truth." Henry called Laura and Richard into his office. "This has Nate's fingerprints all over it," Henry said, his tone grim. Richard nodded. "It's possible, but proving it won't be easy. He could have posted this from anywhere." "Then we'll focus on what we can control," Henry said. "Laura, I want you to draft a statement addressing these claims. Make it clear that we stand by the quality of our vehicles and the integrity of our staff." Laura nodded. "I'll get started right away." "And Richard," Henry continued, "reach out to our legal team. If Nate is behind this, I want to explore our options." As the days passed, the dealership faced a barrage of challenges. More negative reviews appeared online, and a handful of customers canceled orders. The team worked tirelessly to counter the damage, offering additional assurances to buyers and doubling down on their commitment to excellent service. Henry, meanwhile, refused to back down. He spent hours reviewing records, reaching out to customers personally, and brainstorming strategies to rebuild the dealership's reputation. One evening, while sifting through old files, he stumbled across something that gave him pause: a discrepancy in the sales logs from months earlier. Vehicles listed as sold had missing payments or incomplete customer information. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself. He dug deeper and found that all the discrepancies were linked to one salesperson, Nate. The following morning, Henry called a meeting with Laura, Richard, and the dealership's accountant. "It looks like Nate wasn't just a bad employee, he was running a scam," Henry said, laying the evidence before them. "He falsified sales to inflate his numbers, likely pocketing deposits from customers who backed out of deals." Laura shook her head in disbelief. "That explains why some of his buyers never followed through. He probably made it impossible for them to complete the sale." Richard's expression darkened. "If this gets out, it could ruin us." "Not if we handle it the right way," Henry said. "We'll report everything to the authorities and cooperate fully, and we'll be transparent with our customers. They deserve to know we're taking action to fix this." Henry's decision to go public was a gamble, but it paid off. Customers appreciated the dealership's honesty, and many expressed their support. The investigation into Nate's activities gained traction, and it wasn't long before police tracked him down. Nate was arrested at his apartment, where officers found evidence linking him to the fraudulent sales and the online smear campaign. The news made headlines, and Summit Motors was praised for its integrity in handling the situation. With Nate out of the picture, Henry focused on moving forward. He introduced new policies to prevent future misconduct and continued to prioritize customer satisfaction. One afternoon, as he walked the showroom floor, he overheard a conversation between Laura and a young couple. "This is our first big purchase together," the husband said, looking nervously at the price tag of a luxury sedan. Laura smiled warmly. "I understand it's a big decision, but we're here to help. Let's find something that fits your needs and budget." Henry watched as Laura guided the couple through the options, her professionalism and empathy shining through. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had taken on this challenge in the first place. Months later, Summit Motors was thriving again. Sales were up, morale was high, and the dealership had become a model of excellence in the community. Henry stood outside the showroom one evening, watching the sun set over the lot. Laura joined him, a satisfied smile on her face. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said. Henry nodded. "We have. And it's just the beginning." As they stood in the fading light, Henry felt a deep sense of pride. The journey had been anything but easy, but he had proven that integrity and perseverance could overcome even the toughest rumble challenges. Of the old pickup truck pulling into the dealership lot was drowned out by the revving engines of luxury cars in the showroom. Henry Whitman, a wiry, elderly man in his late 70s, stepped out of the vehicle. His faded jeans, scuffed boots, and well-worn flannel shirts seemed out of place among the gleaming rows of high-end sedans and sports cars. He leaned on his cane as he approached the glass doors of Summit Motors, a prestigious car dealership known for its flashy vehicles and even flashier clientele. Henry's eyes sparkled with curiosity as he scanned the showroom, the scent of leather and polish filling the air. Behind the counter, a sleekly dressed salesman, Nate Bowers, exchanged an amused glance with his colleague, Jason. They didn't bother hiding their smirks as Henry made his way inside. "Looks like we've got a customer straight out of a farm catalog," Nate muttered, adjusting his tie. Jason chuckled. "Bet he's here to ask for directions." Henry ignored the muffled snickers and approached the desk. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said with a friendly smile. "I'm looking to buy a car." Nate raised an eyebrow, eyeing Henry's patched-up coat and muddy boots. "Well, sir, you've certainly come to the right place," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Well, these aren't your average pickups. We sell luxury vehicles here." Henry chuckled good-naturedly. "I noticed. That's why I'm here. I've been thinking of treating myself to something a little upscale." Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You mean to tell us you're looking to buy a car today?" "That's right," Henry said, his smile unwavering. "Well," Nate said, feigning politeness, "our cheapest model starts at $80,000. Are you sure this is the right place for you?" Henry's expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps. "I've saved up a bit over the years," he said quietly. "Mind if I take a look around?" As Henry wandered through the showroom, admiring the sleek curves and high-tech interiors of the cars, he could feel the weight of the salesman's stares. "Think he's got 80 grand tucked in his overalls?" Jason whispered, loud enough for Henry to hear. "Maybe he's here for the free coffee," Nate replied with a snort. Henry paused in front of a red sports car, its glossy finish reflecting the fluorescent lights above. It reminded him of a car he'd admired as a boy, a vehicle that symbolized freedom and success. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a soft voice. Henry turned to see a young woman standing nearby. Unlike the others, she seemed genuinely interested. Her name tag read Laura, and her smile was kind. "It sure is," Henry said. "What's the story on this one?" Laura hesitated, glancing at her colleagues before stepping closer. "It's the new model, the Summit Viper, top of the line, but it's expensive." Henry chuckled. "I imagine so. Mind if I sit inside? Of course not, Laura said, opening the door for him. As Henry settled into the plush leather seat, he ran his hands over the steering wheel, his face lighting up with childlike wonder. "I've always loved cars like this," he said. Laura smiled. "It suits you." The moment was interrupted by Nate's voice. "Laura, don't waste your time," he called from across the room. "We've got real customers to attend to." Henry climbed out of the car, his expression calm but thoughtful. He gave Laura a small nod. "Thank you, young lady," he said. Before he left, Henry approached Nate and Jason again. "You boys have a good day now," he said, tipping his hat. "Sure thing, Grandpa," Nate replied with a smirk. As Henry walked out into the parking lot, he glanced back at the showroom, his gaze lingering on the red sports car. He climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving the salesman laughing behind him. The following day, the dealership was buzzing with activity. Laura was at her desk when she noticed a sleek black car pull into the lot. It wasn't just any car. It was a Summit Lancer, a custom model reserved for only the wealthiest clientele. The doors swung open and out stepped Henry, this time dressed in a tailored suit. Nate's jaw dropped as Henry strolled into the showroom, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Good morning," Henry said, his tone calm but commanding. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Nate and Jason exchanged bewildered glances. Laura approached him, her face lighting up in recognition. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "welcome back." "Thank you, Laura," Henry said, his smile warm. He turned to the stunned salesman. "Shall we talk in your office?" Inside the manager's office, the tension was palpable. The dealership's owner, a sharp-suited man named Richard Grant, stood behind his desk, looking both confused and intrigued. "Mr. Whitman, I understand you have some interest in Summit Motors," Richard said. "That's correct," Henry replied. "I've been following your business for some time now." Richard leaned forward. "And how exactly can we help you?" Henry reached into his jacket pocket and placed a document on the desk. It was an acquisition agreement. "You see," Henry said, "as of this morning, I'm the majority shareholder in Summit Motors, which means I'm your boss." The room fell silent. Nate and Jason, standing by the door, looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. "Ah, you can't be serious," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I'm very serious," Henry said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I bought out your largest investor. I've always had an interest in cars, and I thought it was time to invest in something meaningful." He turned to Nate and Jason, his expression hardening. "Of course, I'll need employees who treat every customer with respect. Something tells me that's going to require some changes around here." The news of Henry's acquisition spread like wildfire through the dealership. Employees whispered in hushed tones, and Nate and Jason avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially Henry. The elderly man now held the reins of Summit Motors, and he wasted no time in making his presence felt. "First things first," Henry announced at the morning meeting, his voice steady yet firm. "This dealership is going to change. Respect, integrity, and fairness will be our guiding principles moving forward. Every customer, no matter what they look like or where they come from, will be treated with dignity." The room was silent. Laura, seated near the back, couldn't help but smile. She had seen something special in Henry from the moment he walked through the doors, and now he was proving her right. That afternoon, Henry began his review of the dealership's operations. He started by walking the showroom floor, observing interactions between the staff and customers. Laura approached him during a quiet moment. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "if you don't mind me asking, why Summit Motors? Why now?" Henry's expression softened. "I've always had a passion for cars," he said. "But this isn't just about business. It's personal." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the gleaming red sports car he had admired the day before. "You see, my wife and I used to dream about buying a car like that one. We worked hard all our lives, but we never had the chance. She passed away last year, and I realized life's too short to keep putting things off." Laura nodded, her respect for Henry deepening. "And as for why now," Henry added, "let's just say your colleagues gave me the motivation I needed." While Henry worked on reshaping the dealership's culture, Nate and Jason were in damage control mode. "Can you believe this guy?" Nate hissed to Jason during their lunch break. "He walks in here looking like a farmhand, and now he's acting like he owns the place." Jason frowned. "What are you thinking?" "Just wait," Nate replied with a smirk. The tension reached a boiling point the next day when Henry called Nate into his office. "Nate," Henry began, "I've been reviewing customer feedback from the past year. There are several complaints about your attitude and behavior." Nate's face flushed. "With all due respect, sir, I've been one of the top salesmen here for years. I've brought in more revenue than anyone else." Henry leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Sales are important, but they're not everything. Treating people with respect is just as crucial. Yesterday, I watched you dismiss a young couple because they didn't look wealthy enough. That's not the kind of service I want associated with this dealership." Nate clenched his jaw. "So, what are you saying? You're going to fire me?" "I'm giving you a chance to improve," Henry said, "but if I don't see a change, you'll be looking for another job." Later that evening, as Henry locked up for the night, he noticed Nate lingering near the exit. "Good night, Nate," Henry said, his tone neutral. Nate didn't respond. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. Henry watched him go, a faint unease settling in his chest. Over the next few days, Henry worked tirelessly to implement his vision for Summit Motors. He introduced new training programs focused on customer service and rewarded employees who went above and beyond. Laura quickly emerged as a standout, impressing Henry with her dedication and positive attitude. One afternoon, Henry called Laura into his office. "Laura," he said, "I've been watching the way you interact with customers, and I'm impressed. You have the qualities of a great leader." Laura's eyes widened. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman. That means a lot." "I want you to take on more responsibility," Henry continued. "Effective immediately, you'll be the showroom manager." Laura's jaw dropped. "Really?" "Really," Henry said with a smile. "You've earned it." While Laura flourished in her new role, Nate's resentment grew. He began spreading rumors among the staff, claiming Henry was out of touch and driving the dealership into the ground. "He's gonna ruin us," Nate said to Jason one morning. "We need to do something before it's too late." "What are you suggesting?" Jason asked warily. "Let's just say it's time to remind everyone who the real boss is," Nate replied with a sly grin. The situation came to a head during a high-profile sales event that weekend. The dealership was packed with customers, and Henry was mingling with them, making sure everyone felt welcome. Nate, meanwhile, had other plans. He deliberately ignored potential buyers, focusing instead on creating chaos. He spread misinformation about promotions, confused customers with contradictory statements, and even sabotaged a deal Laura was working on. When Henry confronted him, Nate feigned innocence. "I was just trying to help," he said with a shrug. Henry's patience was wearing thin. "Nate, this is your final warning. One more incident and you're out." That night, Henry sat alone in his office, reflecting on the challenges of the past week. He knew he had made the right decision in buying Summit Motors, but the resistance from some employees was taking its toll. As he locked up and headed to his car, he noticed a group of figures lingering near the edge of the lot. One of them stepped forward. It was Nate. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Whitman?" Nate called out, his voice laced with sarcasm. Henry stopped and turned. "What do you want, Nate?" Nate smirked. "Just a little friendly advice. Stick to your farm trucks. You don't belong here." Henry's expression remained calm, but his eyes were still see about that.